I set the envelope on the gift table, straightened my jacket, and walked back to my seat at the far end of the room. 20 minutes later, my wife held it up in front of everyone and said, "What is this supposed to be?" She laughed. Her sister laughed. Her sister laughed. My son-in-law's mother smiled, the way people smile when they're embarrassed for someone else. And I sat there, 63 years old, watching my wife perform my humiliation like it was entertainment. I didn't stand up. I didn't say anything. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and decided something I had been almost deciding for a long time. Let me back up. My daughter, my only child, got married on a Saturday in October in a restored barn outside of Asheville, North Carolina. String lights, wildflowers, mason jars on every table. She'd planned it for almost 2 years. I'd helped pay for most of it, quietly. The way I do most things, the catering deposit, the photographer's retainer, the shuttle buses from the hotel. I didn't mention it because she didn't ask me to, and because she was happy. And watching her be happy was enough. My wife and I had been married for 11 years at that point. She was my second marriage, her third. We met at a mutual friend's retirement party in Charlotte. She was sharp, quick-witted, put together. She made me feel less alone in a way I hadn't expected to feel again. After my first wife passed, I was 51. I thought I knew what I was doing. I didn't. My wife and my daughter never found a rhythm. That's the polite way to put it. My daughter was 26 when I remarried, old enough that she didn't need a stepmother, and young enough that she still felt the absence of her own mother deeply. My wife, for her part, didn't try very hard. She called it respecting boundaries. My daughter called it something else. I stayed in the middle, trying to hold both of them gently enough that neither one slipped through my hands. For 11 years, that's what I did. My wife had opinions about everything my daughter chose. The apartment she rented, the man she dated, then got engaged to, the wedding venue. A barn, really? The menu? The dress? The fact that she asked a college friend instead of my wife to be her day of coordinator. Every opinion was delivered as concern. Every concern had an edge under it. I noticed. I always noticed. I just kept thinking it would get better, the way you think a draft in the house will seal itself if you wait long enough. My son-in-law, I'll call him by what he is because he earned it, is a good man. Steady. Works in civil engineering, coaches youth soccer on weekends, calls me on Father's Day without prompting. When he proposed to my daughter, he came to me first, sat in my kitchen for 45 minutes, nervous and honest, and told me he loved her, and that he understood what her mother's absence meant, and that he would never try to fill that space, only stand beside it with her. I shook his hand, and then I went into the garage and sat in my car for a while. My gift to them was not traditional. I want to explain it properly, because this is the part that matters. When my first wife was alive, we started a savings account together. Not for anything specific at first, just the habit of it. $10 here, $20 there, whatever we could manage in the early years. Over time, as things got easier financially, we put more in. We called it the someday account. Someday we'd take that trip to Ireland. Someday we'd renovate the kitchen. Someday we'd help our daughter with a down payment. My first wife died before any of those somedays arrived. Cancer, fast and merciless, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I was 50. My daughter was 24. After the funeral, I couldn't close the account. It felt like closing something I wasn't ready to close. So I kept it open, kept adding to it. Not much. Just enough to keep it alive. I thought of it as the last conversation she and I were still having, slow, quiet, across a distance I didn't have language for. By the time my daughter's wedding came, that account held a little over $47,000. I transferred the full balance into a new joint account in my daughter's name and her husband's name. I had it set up with a local credit union. I printed the account details, the routing number, the balance, a short note from me explaining where the money came from and what her mother and I had originally hoped it would become. And I put it all in a plain white envelope. No bow, no card with balloons, just the envelope sealed with their names written on the front in my handwriting. I put it on the gift table when we arrived at the reception. My wife saw me do it. She didn't say anything then. The reception was warm in the way that good weddings are warm. The kind of warmth that comes from people who actually like each other being in the same room. My daughter danced with her new husband, and I stood near the edge of the dance floor and watched her, and thought about her mother, the way I always do at moments like this. My wife was at a different table, talking to her sister and two friends she'd invited. I'd been seated with my daughter's in-laws, which was fine with me. Better than fine, actually. Sometime during the dessert hour, I saw my wife walk over to the gift table. I watched her pick up the envelope. She turned it over, looked at it the way people look at something they've decided isn't worth their attention. Then she walked toward the head table where my daughter and son-in-law were sitting, held the envelope up and said, loud enough that the tables nearby went quiet, "What is this? Did someone seriously just put a plain envelope on the gift table?" She was smiling. Her sister was beside her and she laughed a little. My daughter looked at the envelope and then looked at me across the room. I gave her a very small shake of my head. Not now. My wife set the envelope back down on the edge of the table, not on the gift pile, just on the edge, carelessly, the way you set something down when you've already dismissed it. "People still do cash gifts," someone said. I think it was my son-in-law's aunt. "Cash would at least make sense," my wife said. "This looks like a utility bill." More laughter. Not everyone, but enough. My daughter picked up the envelope and held it in her lap. I set my napkin on the table. I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I walked toward the exit the way I always move through rooms. Slowly, without urgency, like I have somewhere to be and I'm not in a hurry to get there. I stopped at the gift table and I picked up the card I'd tucked under the punch bowl earlier. The small index card with one sentence on it that I'd written for myself, not for anyone else. I put it in my breast pocket, and I walked out. There was a man sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the parking lot. Older gentleman, weathered coat, a paper coffee cup on the ground near his feet. He'd been there when we arrived. Someone from the venue staff had offered him food earlier. I'd seen that through the window. I walked over and sat down next to him. We talked for a little while. He was from Knoxville originally, had a daughter he hadn't spoken to in years. He didn't ask for anything from me, didn't have a pitch or a story designed to extract something. He was just sitting there, the way some people sit, like the sitting itself is enough. I gave him the cash I had in my wallet, $400 and something, whatever was in there. I don't carry much, but I'd taken out extra for the weekend. He looked at it for a moment and then looked at me. "You okay?" he said. "Working on it," I said. He nodded like that was a complete answer. I think it was. I don't know how much time passed. 20 minutes, maybe 30. It was quiet out there. The music from inside was faint, just the bass and a soft wash of voices. Then the door opened. My son-in-law came out first. He was still in his dress shirt, jacket gone, moving fast. Behind him, my daughter. She had the envelope in her hand, open now. The papers half pulled out, and her face was... I don't know how to describe it. Like something had reorganized itself behind her eyes. "Dad," she said. She didn't say anything else for a minute. She just crossed the parking lot and sat down next to me on the wall. My son-in-law stood in front of us, hands in his pockets, not trying to talk. He has the good sense to know when silence is the right offering. Inside the envelope, along with the account paperwork, I had written a letter. 3 pages, handwritten. I told her about the account, when her mother and I opened it, what we'd put into it over the years, what we'd talked about doing with it someday. I told her that every deposit I'd made after her mother died was a way of keeping a promise I hadn't finished making. I told her that I wanted them to use it for something that mattered. A house. A trip they'd always talked about. The start of something. I told her that her mother would have been at this wedding, wild horses couldn't have kept her away, and that the account was the closest thing I had to bringing her. I also told her in the letter that I was tired. Not in a frightening way. Just honestly. I was tired of making myself smaller to keep the peace. Tired of watching my wife perform disdain the way other people perform generosity. Tired of waiting for something to change that I'd known for a long time wasn't going to change on its own. I didn't name my wife specifically in the letter. I didn't need to. My daughter had eyes. She sat beside me on that stone wall, and I watched her read the parts she hadn't read yet, And when she finished, she folded the papers back carefully and put them back in the envelope and held it against her chest. "I remember Mom talking about Ireland," she said. "She wanted to see the cliffs of Moher," I said. "She said she needed to stand somewhere that felt ancient." My daughter laughed a little, and it was the kind of laugh that sits right next to crying. Her new husband put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at me with something steady in his expression. Not pity, just a kind of recognition. He said, "Thank you, sir." That was all. 2 words. No flourishes. Exactly right. We sat out there for a while longer. The October air was cold, but not uncomfortable. The man in the weathered coat had gotten up and gone somewhere while we were talking, and the stone wall was just a stone wall again. Eventually, we went back inside. My wife was at her table. When she saw my daughter's face and then my face, something shifted in her expression. A recalculation happening live in front of me, like a dial spinning to find a signal. She looked at the envelope. She looked at me. I sat back down in my seat and picked up my coffee, which had gone cold. She came over about 5 minutes later, sat in the empty chair next to me. "What was in the envelope?" she said. I didn't answer right away. I thought about how many times over 11 years I had rushed to fill silences like that, to smooth things over, to give her an answer that would prevent the next question. It's a habit that builds so slowly you don't notice it until one day you realize you spent a decade bracing. "Something I'd been saving for a long time," I said. She waited for more. I didn't give her more. The next morning, back at the hotel, she wanted to have the conversation. I'd known it was coming. She said she hadn't meant for it to come out the way it did. She said she hadn't known it was from me. She said if she hadn't known it was from me. She said if she had known, she never would have. "You would have been more careful about who could hear you," I said. "That's what would have been different." She got quiet. There's a version of that conversation where I get angry, where I lay out 11 years of evidence, like a case I've been building in secret, exhibit by exhibit. I used to imagine having that conversation. I stopped imagining it a while ago, because I realized the problem wasn't that I hadn't made my argument clearly enough. The problem was that the other person already knew and had decided it didn't require changing. I told her that I'd been thinking seriously about her living situation and that I thought we should talk to someone. A counselor, a mediator, whatever form that needed to take. Not to save anything necessarily. To close something properly. She cried. Genuine tears, I think. I don't doubt that she felt something real in that moment. Feeling something in a moment isn't the same as having understood it before it arrived. I stayed calm, not cold. I want to be clear about that distinction. Calm. There's a version of calm that's just suppression wearing a mask, and that's not what this was. This was something I'd reached the far side of, a place where the urgency was gone because the decision was already made. And decisions, once they're real, don't need to be performed. The divorce took about 14 months. It was not easy. It was not cheap. We'd had jointly held assets, a house in Charlotte we'd bought together, accounts with both our names on them. My attorney was thorough and fair-minded and told me once, almost as an aside, that what I really seemed to want was to stop losing ground, and she could help me with that. She was right on both counts. My wife, my ex-wife, now, kept the house in Charlotte. I took the lake property in South Carolina that I'd owned before we married, along with a settlement that my attorney negotiated carefully. I moved into the lake house full-time. I planted a vegetable garden in the spring. I built a workbench in the garage. I bought a canoe. My daughter and her husband came to visit in June, 4 months after the wedding. They put a significant part of the account toward a down payment on a house 30 minutes from her in-laws. Smart. I was glad. We sat on the porch in the evening, the 3 of us, and watched the light go across the water, and she told me about the neighborhood. The neighbors who'd already introduced themselves, a farmer's market 6 blocks away that she was deeply enthusiastic about. Normal life. Good life. At one point she asked me how I was doing, not as a pleasantry. She meant it the way she's always meant things, straightforwardly, waiting for a real answer. "Better," I said. "Genuinely? Good," she said. She reached over and put her hand briefly over mine, the way her mother used to do. And I looked out at the water, so she wouldn't see my face. My son-in-law went inside to refill drinks, and for a moment it was just the two of us, and the sound of the lake and the first few insects starting up in the grass along the shore. "I found a letter Mom wrote," my daughter said, "in the paperwork from the account. It was tucked in the back of the folder you put together. I hadn't put it there. I told her so." She nodded slowly. "I figured. I think she put it there a long time ago before she got sick. She must have put it with the account documents. It was folded up small, her handwriting. I didn't ask what the letter said. That was between the two of them. She said she knew about Ireland. She wrote about the cliffs of Moher. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. We sat there while the sky went from gold to grey to a dark, clear blue with stars beginning at the edges, and I thought about my first wife standing somewhere ancient and windswept and feeling exactly what she'd always wanted to feel. I thought about the account, the deposits, all those small monthly acts of stubbornness against loss. I thought about the man on the stone wall in Asheville from Knoxville, who had a daughter he hadn't spoken to in years. I hope he called her. Some things you keep waiting on until the moment passes, other things you hold on to so long they start to hold you back. Knowing which is which, that's the whole work of it, I think. You don't always get it right, but if you're honest with yourself and you stay quiet long enough to hear the difference, you get closer. That's the best any of us can do. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the one in the reception hall, not my wife holding that envelope up like it was something she'd found stuck to a shoe. The one I keep returning to is quieter than that. It's the moment my daughter sat down beside me on that stone wall in the parking lot. The October air cold and still, and didn't say anything at first. Just sat there. That's when I knew something had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a room shifts when someone finally opens a window. I spent a long time in that marriage doing what I thought was the right thing. Keeping the peace. Absorbing. Moving through rooms quietly so as not to disturb whatever fragile arrangement held things together. I called it patience. I called it being the bigger person. What it actually was, for much of it, was a slow forfeiture of self. You don't notice it at first. That's what makes it dangerous. Not that it hurts, but that it stops hurting, and you mistake that numbness for maturity. What changed me wasn't the humiliation in that reception hall. I'd survived smaller versions of that for 11 years. What changed me was my daughter's face when she read that letter. Specifically the moment she understood where the money came from, what it had meant, how long I'd been quietly tending to something real while everything around it had grown complicated and loud. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you suddenly see them clearly after a long time of only seeing the role they played. That mattered more to me than I expected. There's something to be said about the difference between reacting and deciding. I didn't blow up that night. I didn't make a speech or manufacture a scene to match the one my wife had made. I walked outside, sat with a man I'd never met, and let the evening be what it was. That kind of steadiness. The ability to feel the full weight of something without letting it detonate you. That's not passivity. That took me most of my adult life to develop, and I'm still not sure I've fully gotten there, but I know the difference now between holding yourself together because you're afraid and holding yourself together because you've made a real choice. The account, the $47,000, all those years of deposits, was built on something honest. Two people deciding, early and quietly, to save something for later. It outlasted the marriage it started in. It found its way to my daughter anyway, which is where it was always going. That's how I think about cause and effect now. Not punishment, not cosmic reward, just the natural tendency of honest things to persist. You keep doing the right thing, steadily, without an audience, and eventually it accumulates into something solid enough to hand to the people you love. My son-in-law said thank you with 2 words, and meant it completely. My daughter found her mother's letter tucked in the folder, a letter I didn't know was there, written before any of this pain existed, full of a future her mother had imagined, and I had tried, in my inadequate way, to carry forward. That letter wasn't addressed to me, but I felt seen by it anyway. I don't know that I have a tidy lesson to offer. I'm 63, not 23. The world doesn't straighten out into clean lines from here. What I have is this. The man who sat on that wall and gave away his cash and talked to a stranger from Knoxville was closer to himself than the man who had spent 11 years flinching. The distance between those two men cost something. But the cost was worth paying if it meant arriving somewhere real. That's enough. That has to be enough. And most days now, sitting on my porch in South Carolina with the lake glowing silver in the evening light, I find that it genuinely is